What if heaven isn't the paradise we've been led to believe? What if eternal bliss comes with a hidden cost? A cost so terrifying, it challenges everything you thought you knew. We often think of heaven as an eternal reward and that it's the most desirable thing for everyone, but can we even grasp what it means to be immortal? How do you wrap your mind around the concept of eternity? Could it be more psychologically torturous than we dare to admit, and a topic we barely scratch the surface of that no one wants to talk about? Which brings us to the question or title of this video: is heaven actually a terrifying or detrimental concept for humanity? And at first you might dismiss this dumb and thoughtless question, and I don't blame you. But what if there's more to this than we're willing to explore, where each and every single one of us have different religions, ideologies, worldviews, and beliefs throughout history? Is heaven just an empty promise delivered to maintain control for mankind, or how does one get served with divine justice in the afterlife? How does heaven and hell shape and influence our moral compass and ethical concerns? And is eternal bliss even desirable in the first place, stemming from the problems of immortality? In this video, we're going to explore heaven and hell not as literal places, but as meaningful, metaphorical symbols of the human experience, reflecting our choices, behaviors, and ultimately, the way we live our lives. To understand the origins of heaven and hell, we must look back to ancient Mesopotamia. The Mesopotamians, also known as the Sumerians and Akkadians, viewed the sky as a series of domes over a flat earth, each dome made of a precious stone. Heaven was the realm of the gods, separate from earth, and not accessible to mortals. When people died, their souls went to Kur or Irkala, a dark shadowy afterlife where all souls, regardless of their actions in life, were treated the same. The concept of heaven as a place of reward wasn't prevalent in Mesopotamia. The gods resided in a heavenly realm, but human souls went to the same bleak afterlife. However, ancient Egyptians developed a more refined concept of the afterlife. The righteous would live in the field of reeds, Aru, a paradise judged by Osiris, while unworthy souls face annihilation in the underworld, Duat. Then came Zoroastrianism, founded by the Persian prophet Zoroaster around the 6th century BC, which introduced a clear distinction between heaven and hell. The righteous would ascend to the house of song, a place of eternal light, while the wicked would suffer in the house of lies, a dark and painful realm. The Greeks also had a complex view of the afterlife. Initially, all souls went to the neutral underworld Hades, but over time, concepts like Elysium, a paradise for heroes, and Tartarus, a place of punishment for the wicked, emerged, representing early ideas of heaven and hell. All of these concepts laid the foundations of early human thought of heaven and hell, but it wasn't until the Abrahamic religions that shaped our beliefs into what we now know and are familiar with the concept of heaven and hell. Judaism initially focused on Sheol, but later introduced more defined concepts of reward, Gan Eden, and punishment, Jahannam. Christianity developed a more dichotomous view of the afterlife, with a clear division between eternal heaven and hell, strongly influenced by Jewish and Greco-Roman ideas. Islam presents a detailed and structured vision of the afterlife, with Jannah as a physical and spiritual paradise and Jahannam as a multifaceted hell, both central to the concept of divine justice and mercy. All of these concepts reflect each religion's views on justice, morality, and the nature of God, with heaven and hell serving as ultimate destinations for the soul based on one's earthly life. The Christian definitions of heaven and hell, followed by Islamic interpretations, became the more popular and widely recognized due to the historical spread of these religions. Christianity's influence, particularly through European colonialism and cultural dominance, played a significant role in making its view of heaven and hell mainstream. Islam's expansion also contributed to the widespread acceptance of these concepts in large parts of the world. So we've cleared the definition of heaven and hell, a place and state of being for eternity, but do we even know what eternity is? And is eternal happiness even desirable in the first place? Eternity is infinite or unending time, complete in absolute perpetuity. There is no end. Eternity and the related concept of infinity have long been associated with strong emotional overtones, serving to astonish, weary, or confound those who attempt to even grasp them. Even by definition and in a mathematical perspective, we can't ever truly comprehend infinity, not even as a physical concept. For example, you can't visualize the number infinity or the infinite universe, let alone infinite time, where the existence of the cosmos has only been around for about 14 billion years, which is literally nothing compared to infinity. And so our first argument is, how can we even grasp or conceptualize living eternally? Now, this problem is closely knit to the problem of immortality, the ability to live forever. In immortality, you will soon encounter problems such as losing everyone you know, fading memories, the imminent and inevitable death of the earth and sun, then later basking in the cold death of the universe, and eventually perhaps getting a boring outlook in life. Such are the problems brought up by English philosopher Bernard Williams on the tedium of immortality, which claims that any immortal human life would necessarily become a life marked by the fact that there would be no reason to go on living, where that doesn't really happen in heaven. In heaven, it is believed that no depressing thoughts, suffering, or negative emotions will exist. Now, people have long debated the argument of whether immortality is worth it. Some philosophers argue that death gives life itself meaning. Now, if we compare that to the problem with living eternally in heaven, some people can counter this issue with the statement of everyone in heaven will only experience joy and happiness, and such depressing thoughts or suffering will cease to exist. If people live in heaven for eternity, then joy and happiness will become meaningless. Happiness only comes from experiencing pain and suffering. If you have never experienced them, then you won't know what happiness is because you have nothing to compare those experiences with. What do you relate happiness with? When you've achieved success? When you help other people? When you win that game or match? Why do you relate that as happiness and not with other experiences that, by definition, means suffering, trauma, or depression? How do you exactly define happiness when on one hand, a person who's thirsty for days finally gets his hand on a glass of water will then relate that as a very meaningful and happy moment, while on the other hand, when you drink water right now, you don't really think much of it, and most certainly not happiness? Do you bring your earth memories to heaven? If not, then what would be the point and purpose of living when you won't remember anything later? If yes, then that would probably be the worst option. Your time and experience on Earth will become a speck in the span of your life in heaven, and you will never get to experience them again, which may be resolved temporarily by wishing to live in a moment on Earth if that is allowed, or at the very least a clone of it in heaven. Humans are fundamentally hedonists and arguably selfish beings. They always crave and desire for better and better. This is found in the nature of all animals. Whenever there's a hierarchy or comparison, we always choose the better option. In psychological hedonism, it views that all human action is ultimately motivated by desires for pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Is happiness just your dopamine receptors firing, or is it something else? This belief shows that all humans have gone through something bad, and they will do anything to avoid that experience and go do something else that they might think is better. So when you go to heaven, what is there for happiness to compare to? Your memories, if you do bring them, or not? Either way, you will only experience happiness if you can compare an experience with something worse. Being in a state of bliss, joy, or happiness for eternity inherently doesn't make that much sense as a mortal being. Scientifically speaking, the feeling of happiness comes from your brain's reward system and the dopamine hormones. Our insatiable desire for more is rooted in evolution. Over generations, those with a strong desire for resources were more likely to survive. This survival-oriented trait, passed down through generations, deeply motivates individuals to consistently seek and acquire more, even to the point of more than what they need. And over time, your brain will get used to the good stuff and will want to seek greater stuff, and the cycle of chasing the ultimate perfection never ends. So if this nature, our insatiable tendency to seek better and better, is carried over to heaven, then you can only imagine living in a perpetual, non-stop state of being that is wanting more and more for all eternity, fueled by the nature of heaven that allows you to receive or wish for anything instantly, which will only speed things up. We can already see the effects of instant gratifications in humans, so I can't really imagine what our souls will become once they're in heaven after a long period of time. Does it evolve up to a point where nothing else will satisfy them, and thus will have nothing left to excite them or give a sense of fulfillment other than wanting to be God himself? Or perhaps our spiritual existence in heaven will transcend beyond our biological limitations, and thus these biological influences in our psychology won't matter. Perhaps we'll get the chance to explore the boundless and infinite universe as a higher dimensional being. Christianity believes that in heaven, our desires will be so in line with God's desires that the two will become one. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Or in Revelation 22:3, where it proclaims his servants will serve him. So if we go to heaven, are we just destined to become servants, and our only purpose in existence just to serve God? Will free will still exist in heaven? In the New Testament, the book of Revelation describes a war in heaven that refers to a rebellion led by Lucifer, later known as Satan, against God. Lucifer was originally a high-ranking angel, often described as beautiful and powerful. However, he became prideful and desired to overthrow God, wanting to elevate his throne above God and rule over heaven. Lucifer persuaded a group of angels to join him in his rebellion against God. These angels, who follow Lucifer, are often referred to as fallen angels or demons. A battle then ensued between the forces of Lucifer and the loyal angels led by the archangel Michael. The Bible then depicts Michael and his angels defeating Lucifer and his followers. As a result, Lucifer and the rebellious angels were cast out of heaven. So if angels, which are spiritual beings believed to act as an attendant or messenger of God, let alone a high-ranking one, try to overthrow the throne in heaven, then what's stopping mankind from causing conflicts in heaven? We've already discussed the definition of hell, the place of eternal torment and suffering, but that comes with a few complications. We've discussed the problem with living eternally, so how can you justify eternal punishment, let alone from a momentary life? Now, this question touches a profound theological issue that has since been debated for centuries by scholars and philosophers. The idea of eternal punishment, in contrast to a finite life, raises concerns about justice, fairness, and the nature of God itself. So we'll be taking a look at some of the perspectives that attempt to address this issue: the nature of sin and divine justice. Some theological perspectives argue that sin, particularly mortal sin, is not just a finite act but a rejection of an infinite good, namely God. Since God is infinitely good, the rejection of God is seen as having infinite consequences, thus justifying eternal punishment. In this view, God's justice is perfectly holy and cannot tolerate sin. Eternal punishment is seen as a necessary consequence of God's holiness and justice. Sin is viewed not just in terms of its temporal duration, but in its nature as an offense against an eternal being. But this argument contradicts the nature of God itself, which claims that God is all good and forgiving, so why can't he accept a mere creation that rejects the idea of believing in him? Why does God need to be worshipped or believed in? Blasphemy, the act or offense of speaking sacrilegiously about God or sacred things in a profane manner, is one of the most unforgivable sins. If that is an offense and God is unable to forgive an insult that was spoken from a place of critical thought of his own creation, then perhaps he is the most hypocritical being in the universe. And people believe God exists due to a variety of reasons, but they all come for the same reason: faith. Some people are fixated and believe that God exists with 100% conviction. Some people believe he doesn't exist with 100% conviction. Some people fall in between and are still looking for bits or pieces to support their belief. So where does this sin fall into this blurry line? How are they judged accordingly when people have different rationales and levels of conviction? Free will and personal responsibility. Another perspective is that eternal punishment is a result of a person's free and conscious decision to reject God. The choice to turn away from God is seen as a definitive act with eternal consequences because it represents a final and unchangeable orientation of the will. Some argue that, at the moment of death, a person's decision to accept or reject God becomes eternal. Therefore, the punishment is not just for a momentary action, but for an eternal state of being that the person has chosen. Again, this perspective comes with a few hindrances and drawbacks. How can you justify a mere mortal's choice in his temporary life as a final, set-in-stone, eternal choice? Not just in a metaphor sense, but in actual, physical sense, that is, a finite experience compared to an infinite experience. Even if the person lived for billions of years to take his time to make his decision in believing whether God is real or not, in comparison to eternity, that is nothing, let alone living for a measly 80 years. Proportionality and divine mercy. Some critics argue that eternal punishment seems disproportionate to the finite sins committed in a temporal life. This begs the question about the nature of divine justice and whether it aligns with human concepts of fairness. Some theological traditions emphasize God's mercy and the possibility of salvation even after death. St. Augustine of Hippo argued that because of the guilt of original sin, everyone deserves eternal damnation. Concepts such as purgatory in Catholicism or the idea of universal salvation in some Christian universalist views offer alternatives to the idea of eternal punishment, focusing more on God's desire for all souls to be saved. Whatever perspective it may be, there's always a saying, God works in mysterious ways. Some theologians propose that human beings cannot fully comprehend God's justice, and that what seems unjust from a human perspective might be part of a larger divine plan that transcends human understanding. Swiss Reformed theologian Karl Barth wrote, God is personal, but personal in an incomprehensible way, insofar as the conception of his personality surpasses all our views of personality. The idea is that God's ways are beyond human reasoning and that divine justice operates on a level that we may not yet fully grasp. For me personally, this both makes somewhat of a sense, but there's a counterintuitive argument for it as well. Perhaps we don't fully understand what good and evil truly is. We generally derive what is morally good and evil by the outcome, so things like murder or theft equate to a negative outcome. But then, what's the outcome of not believing in God, or heaven and hell? There is no direct consequence or even outcome from that quote-unquote sin. I guess this is a perfect time to bring up the difference between divine punishment and mortal sentences. The worst prison sentence that you can get today is either the life sentence or the death penalty. Taking from the US court system, the death penalty can be imposed on defendants convicted of some of the worst capital offenses like murder, treason, or genocide. But generally, the US now only does life imprisonment, so let's go off with that. A life sentence is a prison term that typically lasts for one's lifetime. However, an individual may be able to receive a sentence that could potentially allow them to be released at some point. For example, a judge may impose a sentence of 30 years to life with a chance of parole, whereas a divine justice system that believes in heaven or hell, on the other hand, gives out eternal punishment without parole. In comparison, the life sentence lasts until the offender dies, so this means a limited time of punishment, where an eternal punishment never ends. The only problem with us humans' justice system is that we make mistakes. We sometimes convict those who are innocent or scapegoats, and a lot of times people get punished wrongly. On the other hand, God will judge and give out divine punishments and won't overlook or mistake a single soul. But what about the inherent divine crime itself? How is sin judged fairly? Again, this is a broad and open-ended question and depends on what religion or ideology, but in many religious traditions, God is seen as the embodiment of perfect justice and holiness. Sin, therefore, is understood as a violation of God's moral law, which is absolute and unchanging. And we might never know or even comprehend what made God decide which is morally right and wrong. So here I finally want to conclude everything so far and bring up some points on the ethical and philosophical dilemmas about heaven and the original idea of this video itself, which is how the concept of heaven can be terrifying. Number 1. The idea that eternal bliss is a reward for certain actions or beliefs raises questions about whether anyone truly deserves such a reward. Is it fair for a finite lifetime of good deeds or faith to be rewarded with infinite happiness, or vice versa? Number 2. Many religious teachings suggest that only certain people, or believers in a specific faith, will enter heaven. This exclusivity poses ethical concerns about the fate of those who never had the opportunity to believe or follow the correct path, which is impossible to prove. Everyone thinks that their religion or ideology is right, and this conflict never really ends. Number 3. Some religions say that when you go to heaven, you will meet your relatives and friends who share the same belief. The idea that some loved ones might not be in heaven due to differing beliefs or actions raises ethical concerns. The eternal separation from those who didn't make it to heaven can create a somewhat sense of guilt, sorrow, and questioning of divine justice. Which brings us to the last point. Number 4. Limitations in heaven. Are there limitations to what you can have or wish for in heaven? Can you wish to become a god in heaven? Or just like the previous point, are you able to recall and reunite friends who have different beliefs or religion? These limitations reflect the idea that heaven is a place of ultimate moral and spiritual fulfillment, where desires are naturally aligned with divine goodness and the principles of the faith. Wishes that deviate from this moral and spiritual perfection are seen as incompatible with the nature of heaven. Even beyond the literal place of heaven itself, the metaphorical concept and thought of heaven is terrifying and causes some detrimental effects to us humans as well. The focus on heaven as the ultimate goal might lead to a diminished emphasis on justice, kindness, and compassion in the present world. If the afterlife is seen as important, it could justify neglecting the suffering and needs of others in this life. For example, do humans believing in their faith do good deeds and behave well because they expect to go to heaven? Does the concept of heaven promote a self-interested approach to morality where actions are motivated by the desire for reward, hoping that they can get into heaven, rather than genuine virtue? As we've seen, these concepts are not just about what happens after we die, but also about how we live our lives. They serve as mirrors, reflecting our deepest fears, hopes, and the moral frameworks we construct to make sense of this world. Whether viewed as literal places or symbolic representations, heaven and hell compel us to confront the ultimate questions of life, death, and what lies beyond. The purpose of this video is to just bring about awareness in how important critical thinking is, which spans across philosophy, psychology, history, science, and more. This video is in no way an attempt to badmouth, slander, or diminish any religious beliefs or ideologies. There are massive benefits that come from religion, the longest-standing universal culture that humans have adopted and lived by from the beginning of human history. I just wish that everyone has the time to reassess and be open and willing to learn without bias, and most importantly, have perspective. So this video is my perspective that I have gotten from all of the information I've gathered. If you have something to add, interesting takes, arguments, or opinions regarding this matter, then you can leave them in the comments for others to view as well. Please converse with others civilly and treat others with respect. Also, huge thanks to all of these amazing people from the Discord server who have helped with peer review and feedback on this topic and script. If you would like to join and converse with me and other people in the community, then be sure to join using the link in the description. Subscribe if you want more interesting content, like the video if you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching everyone. Peace.